Hello and welcome to my final video in my Icord edging series. The previous two videos have gone over how to do a classic Icord edge and then how to do a neater double or triple Icord selvedge. And now in this video I'm going to show you my favourite method for creating a very neat Icord edge. I'm sure I'm not the first person to come up with this method. Basically all I'm doing is mashing together two already established techniques. In fact, I'm basically mashing together my previous two videos. So I've just combined the classic Icord edging with the double or triple selvedge knitting edging. And I think the result is the neatest and most symmetrical that I can get these edges to look. In the previous video, the resulting edges were very well matched and balanced, and they were almost symmetrical, but I found that the tensions were often different on the different sides. And I found that it's easier to keep the tension on both the edges equal in this technique. On this knitting sample you can see both the double and the triple selvedge that I'm going to show you today. I'm going to refer to it as a double mashup Icord and a triple mashup Icord because it is a mashup of techniques. And I didn't really know what else to call it. I could name it after myself, but my ego's just not that big. You can see that the double selvedge is just 2 stitches wide at each edge, and the triple selvedge is 3 stitches wide at each edge. I do find these edges to be very neat in comparison to a lot of other techniques, and they look just the same on the reverse of the knitting as well. All of the Icord edging techniques are perfect for teaming up with an Icord bind off and an Icord cast on technique, just so you get that Icord look all around the border of your knitting. I will be doing videos on the bind off and cast on shortly. Okay, so I'm first going to show you how to do the double mashup Icord edge. To add this technique to any pattern, you just need to add 4 extra stitches onto your needles when you cast on. In my case, I am following a Garter Stitch pattern, so I'm just doing knit stitches in between the edges. And if, for instance, the pattern that you're following says to cast on 20 stitches, you will cast on 24. So for the first 2 stitches, all you're going to do is knit stitches. So it's a really easy start, you just do 2 regular knit stitches. Once you've done those, you go onto the main pattern that you're following, in my case Garter Stitch. So I'm just going to knit all the way across the row until I only have 2 stitches left on the left hand needle. I then slip a stitch purlwise, and this is done with the working yarn at the back behind the needles. I then bring the working yarn from the back to the front of the needles and then do a purl stitch. And that's the first row of this edging technique finished. And now we're on to the second row. So again we slip the first stitch purlwise, keeping the working yarn at the back of the needles. Then you bring the yarn from the back to the front of the needles and do a purl stitch. You then move on to the main pattern that you're following, in my case Garter Stitch again, and knit across the row until you only have 2 stitches remaining. You then bring the yarn from the back of the needles to the front and just slip both stitches purlwise. And that is the second row of the pattern finished. You might notice that the working yarn actually leaves your knitting now a couple of stitches down and not in the normal place. But don't let that confuse you, just treat the working yarn as you normally would. Okay, so all you have to do now is add that pattern to all the rows of the pattern you're following, and then you'll have nice, neat Icord selvedges. And now I'm going to show you how to make the triple mashup Icord edge. And for this technique you're going to need 3 stitches at each end of every row. That means you're going to have to cast on an extra 6 stitches at the beginning of your project. Again, we start off nice and easy with 3 knit stitches. You then move into your main pattern, in my case garter stitch, until you only have 3 stitches remaining. You then do a knit stitch, then you bring the working yarn from the back of the needles to the front and slip a stitch purlwise, and then you do a purl stitch. And that's the first row completed. And now on to the second row, where we start by slipping a stitch purlwise with the yarn at the back. You then knit a stitch, and then you bring the working yarn from the back to the front of the needles and slip another stitch purlwise. You then go back to your normal pattern until you only have 3 stitches remaining on the left hand needle. You then bring the working yarn from the back to the front and slip those final 3 stitches purlwise. Another note I want to add is just try and keep the edges nice and tight. If the edges aren't tight enough, they become quite loose and they don't look as neat as they could be. So just try and remember to tighten up the yarn when you're doing the edging pattern. Okay, so that concludes my tutorial, and I really hope you found it useful. Thank you very much for watching.